Great to have you with us today, Bishop Jackson.
Well, EW is fine, John. And John, thank you so much. I didn't know you lived in Chesapeake. Now that I know you do, I'm glad to know that I'll be able to have you as a neighbor when I become lieutenant governor. How's that sound?
I know. Well, we're actually relocating to Northern Virginia, unfortunately, in July when my little one's out of school. Why don't we go right to Medicaid expansion? Yesterday, Governor McDonnell basically said that what he's going to attempt to do now is try to manage the Affordable Care Act through Virginia. But one of the biggest issues that we've got right now, EW, as it relates to Obamacare, if you will, is in Virginia we have about 275,000 people that are uninsured. Part of the Affordable Care Act says that everybody has to be insured. So now the governor's trying to figure out how exactly to implement this. If you were lieutenant governor right now, what would your position be on figuring out the implementation of the Affordable Care Act?
Well, my understanding, John, is I made some comments about this, and I think that you after I was off the air, sort of critiqued my comments. Let me say them again, so there's clear in everybody's mind where I stand. I don't agree with complying with Obamacare at all. I believe it's an unconstitutional encroachment on our freedom. I believe it's a battle that we as Americans are going to have to stand up and fight against, because if we give in to this, what is going to be next? So in my opinion, what we need to do is defy, not comply. And by the way, I need medical care. I want everybody to be able to have medical care. All these uninsured people, what good is it going to do them to have insurance if they can't get to a doctor? Because doctors are fleeing the profession. Because the federal government, I've had my doctor say to me, I spend more time trying to comply with the federal government's requirements, and this thing isn't even fully implemented yet, than I do trying to treat my patients. So if we start yielding, start bowing to this, we are going to find ourselves in a mess where fewer of our citizens are able to get adequate health care, and we are going to end up, I guarantee you, footing the bill. It always works out that way, either through the taxpayer or through the state having to pick up a bill because the federal government says, well, we can no longer pay this, that, or the other. Some of these costs, of course, are paid by the federal government in the early years, and then in the out years, the federal government expects the state to pick them up. So I have no interest whatsoever in implementing Obamacare.
That sounds great, EW, on a soundbite, but the reality of it is that this is the law of the land. Now, we as conservatives jump up and down talking about we have to respect the rule of law. Well, this is the law. Now, I'm not for Obamacare. We all fought against it. We all know that it's potentially a disaster, but it passed the Supreme Court. It passed the House. It's the law. So when you say you want to deny, not comply, then what do you say to the fact that right now this is the law that we have to deal with it?
Well, I didn't say deny. I said defy, not comply. And it didn't pass the Supreme Court. All the Supreme Court said with the unfortunate betrayal of Justice Roberts to the Constitution of the United States, in my view, he twisted himself into a pretzel and came up with calling it a tax in order to get it passed. I'm not sure what was in his mind, but I know one thing. Intellectually, that was a bankrupt decision. And the other four justices, I think, made arguments that made clear this is, if we go this route, then what's next? But look, if I buy your argument, okay, then I really shouldn't I should still not be able to stay in a hotel because of the color of my skin. If I buy your argument, there are lots of laws that once were on the books. At one point, the Supreme Court said that a black person is not human, is not entitled to be considered anything but property. So, look, our founding fathers believed that there is natural law, which all other law is subservient to, because it is based and rooted and grounded in truth. It never changes. I don't think we will ever and should ever submit to the idea that the federal government has the right to tell us that we have to buy a product, that we have to submit our health care needs to the federal government. And if we do start complying with that, I think we are headed down a very, very dark road. So, you say it sounds good as a soundbite. Well, for me, as an American of African descent, it's more than a soundbite. It goes back to that idea that Dr. King said, an unjust law is really no law at all.
EW, what does implementing this law have to do with race?
I'm using that as an example. I didn't say it had anything to do. I'm using that as an example of a law. Just because something is a law doesn't make it right and doesn't mean one has to comply with it. You understand the analogy, John? I'm using that as an analogy.
So you are running for lieutenant governor. That means that if you win, you're going to preside over the state senate of Virginia, and there's certain things that reality has to be done. What would you recommend right now? What would you tell Governor Bob McDonnell to do?
I would tell Governor McDonnell to veto any attempt to implement state exchanges under Obamacare.
And then if he were to do that, EW, what would the consequences of that be?
Well, frankly, John, you're the one who's so keen on implementing it. Why don't you tell me what you think the consequences would be?
Well, I think they're a lot more dire in the reality of governance than meets the eye. And one of my concerns is that the level of the rhetoric that you're injecting does not meet the reality of the situation. I mean, the governor has a number of choices under the law of the United States. He's either got to implement the exchanges or not. He either can manage it the way he would prefer or not. We do have 275,000 people that are uninsured in Virginia that, according to the law that passed, they have to be insured. So the governor has to act within the reality of his job as the governor of Virginia. And to simply throw up your hands and say, hey, screw everything, I'm not going to deal with any, I'm just going to veto it all, then there's going to be fines that are going to come with that. And meantime, you still have those 275,000 people that are uninsured, and you've still got the Medicaid expansion issue.
I got your point. So why don't we just put this on the table? You support Obamacare. I do not.
No, I do not support Obamacare. I support the rule of law. I support the law.
Wait a minute. Let me finish my point. You say you keep bringing up these uninsured people, and you're suggesting that the only way to solve that problem is Obamacare. So in effect, you bought into it. Now, let me go back in our history. I don't know whether you've read the Federalist Papers, but James Madison anticipated that the federal government would act in ways that the states thought was unconstitutional. We faced this a number of times in our history. He recommended, read Federalist Paper 46, he recommended that states defy when the federal government is acting unconstitutionally. He recommended that they band together and resist the encroachment by the federal government. He recommended that executives refuse to comply. He recommended that the General Assembly pass laws that would oppose what the federal government is doing. So now maybe you know better than the father of our Constitution, but I happen to think he was pretty wise in his recommendations.
You know what? I'm not for Obamacare, and you have miscast my position, which you can certainly do. But look, at the end of the day, the governor has a certain amount of options. All right, well, why don't we go over, I've got about a minute and a half. Why don't we go to transportation? Now, this is real. The governor proposed a transportation reform plan that included raising taxes, raising the sales tax, getting rid of the gasoline tax. Now we've got alternative legislation from the existing lieutenant governor who has suggested we increase the gas tax and take more money out of the general fund. If you were lieutenant governor right now, what is your position to solve the state's ongoing transportation debacle?
Well, first of all, I don't agree with what Bowling has recommended, but I don't agree with what the governor has recommended either. First of all, divide the transportation problems that we face into two different categories. One is the category of repair of our roads. The second is the category of the need to build new roads and deal with congestion. Those are two separate things. The issue of repairs can be dealt with a lot more cheaply than the issue of building new roads. That's extremely expensive. I believe that we're not spending enough money on transportation. I believe that we can take money out of the general fund. We ought to be able to do that. We ought to pass a law that allows that. I also believe that we ought to take a hard look at the budget and find money for transportation, because I'm categorically, unequivocally opposed to any increase in taxes on the people of Virginia. We are taxed enough already. Find the money in the existing budget. Let's get our economy growing so that revenues increase and we can have more money for transportation. But I am tired of seeing the pockets of Virginians raided by politicians who always have another reason to take more money from the people of Virginia. I opposed it when Tim Kaine recommended it, and I still oppose it.
So what would you specifically suggest that we do as Virginians? What needs to get done in the State House in order to finally solve our 3-decade transportation crisis? Give me some specifics.
I just gave you specifics. I think you look in the budget for the funding that you need to spend on the repair of our roads and the funding that you need to spend on building additional roads. I think we can also look at, private sector arrangements in which, we've done it here in Chesapeake, as you know, with the Jordan Bridge, in which we allow private companies to come in, recoup their funds through tolls, as long as that's done in a fair and equitable way, and we're not taking tolls from one road to spend for roads in some other portion of our state. I don't have a problem with looking at that. Look, the bottom line here is there are other ways to solve this problem other than raising taxes.
There we go. Bishop W Jackson, give them your website one more time so they know where to go for more information, sir.
It's jacksonforlg.com. That's jacksonforlg.com. And thank you, John. I appreciate the spirited debate.
Always a pleasure.